Hey, podcast family, welcome to the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast, the podcast that adds value to leaders who multiply value to others. I'm Mark Cole, and this week we are back with part 2 of John Maxwell's incredible lesson on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you missed part 1, I challenge you, pause the button, go back and listen, because there are some great wisdom nuggets that John gives us as we learn about transformation and a transformational leader. Today, there's even more. John completes his talk on Dr. King's life and leadership. Now remember, he did this talk in front of Coretta Scott King and Bernice King, and John shared 5 points. Today, we will finish up with the final 3 points on how leaders can create positive change in their world and in their community. Once John is done, I will come back with my co-host, Traci Morrow, and we're going to offer you some practical application that will help you implement the things you learned here into your own leadership. If you would like to download the bonus resource, which is the fill-in-the-blank worksheet from this lesson, please visit maxwellpodcast.com/MLK. and click on the bonus resource button just below the show notes. All right, here we go. Here is John Maxwell.
Now, we've seen there are 2 things so far that leaders do to create positive change. Number 1, they listen, they lead by being led, and number 2, they communicate, they connect with others. Number 3, they persuade. In other words, they move others to action. Now, how did Dr. King motivate people to act? Number 1, he placed events in context. He had the ability when he spoke to put all the events in context. Let me explain what I mean. In your notes, doing so creates understanding as to why the movement is important, and that in turn allows each individual to decide what the vision means to them personally. Martin placed the American Civil Rights Movement in the context of a much broader struggle. It wasn't just a group of people protesting for their civil rights. It was a resumption of the incomplete revolution of the Civil War. And it was the continuation of that noble journey toward the goals reflected in the Declaration of Independence, the preamble to the Constitution itself, the Bill of Rights, and the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments to the Constitution. In fact, one of the things I noticed when I was doing research and reading about him that I just thought was powerful, when you talk about putting something in context, he liked to talk about Rip Van Winkle. And he said the amazing thing, it's not that he slept for all those years, the amazing thing is he slept through a revolution. And he kept telling the people, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be the Rip Van Winkle. You don't want to sleep through what is incredible in the change that's being created in our culture and society today. Number 2, how did he motivate people to act? The second thing he did is he appealed to the ethics and the morality of people. Dr. King often portrayed the movement as just that. Not simply a conflict between white people and black people, but a struggle between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. In Martin's mind, it was a quest for freedom and human dignity. We no longer will be tolerant of anything less than our due right and heritage. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. If America is to remain a first-class nation, she can no longer have second-class citizens. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we'll all perish as fools. He appealed to ethics and morality. He placed events in context. The third thing that Dr. King did that motivated people is that he shared facts and advocated specific initiatives. Great leaders point to the problem and then clearly give several solutions. In In fact, Dr. King would ask, how is it that we can have all the great technology in America and yet cannot make the Constitution work at a luncheonette in a southern town? See, Dr. King constantly not only shared with what the facts were, but he was always giving ideas to the government, to the president, to Congress of how to create certain acts that would allow this to no longer be. The last thing that he did in moving people to act, number 4, he provided continual encouragement and set a good example. He was constantly encouraging people, and he modeled the behavior that he wanted them to see. At times when there were setbacks, Martin offered the people comfort and reassurance. No lie can live forever, he'd say. Truth pressed to earth will rise again. The arm of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He would remind them that sometimes it's necessary to go backward in order to go forward, or that a final victory is an accumulation of many short-term victories. The fourth thing that leaders do in creating positive change is they consolidate. They form alliances with others. Martin Luther King understood that in isolation, a minority group would not be able to achieve a major social transformation. 10% of the population cannot, by tensions alone, induce 90% to change a way of life. We aren't going to be free anywhere in the United States until there is a committed empathy on the part of the white majority. So Dr. King advocated the creation of alliances of many kinds: political, social, religious, intellectual, economic, and cultural. Coming together creates energy, enthusiasm, and courage. The biggest job in getting any movement off the ground, Martin wrote, is to keep together the people who form it. This task requires more than a common aim. It demands a philosophy that wins and holds the people's allegiance, and it depends upon open channels of communications between the people and their leaders. And Martin Luther King kept people together by doing two things: asking for specific commitments, and number 2, by planning and goal setting. So how do leaders create positive change? We've looked at 4 ways, modeled by Dr. King. Number 1, listen. You lead by being led. 2, communicate. You connect with others. 3, persuade. Move others to action. And 4, consolidate. Form alliances with others. Number 5, touch. Walk slowly through the crowd. It reminds me, of course, many years ago now when Peters and Waterman did In Search of Excellence. Remember, and they coined the phrase that became very popular in corporate society, MBWA, management by walking around. So you walk around, you touch the people, you see them. That's exactly what Dr. King did. This is not in your notes, but let me just read it to you. During the 6 years of the American Revolution, for instance, General George Washington literally spent every waking and sleeping moment in the field with his troops. Abraham Lincoln made daily walks to the War Department during the Civil War, and he also toured the Capitol on horseback and visited the troops in the battlefields in neighboring Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Lincoln's top general, Ulysses S. Grant, resolved that he would not rent a house at the Capitol and direct the war effort from an armchair in Washington. Franklin Roosevelt, because he was confined to a wheelchair, brought others to the White House and kept a crowded schedule of meetings and interviews, and frequently his wife Eleanor would travel in the president's place, proudly noting that she was her husband's legs. And Harry Truman was famous not only for his whistle-stop campaign, but also for his regular evening walks. In other words, the great leaders walk slowly through the crowd. And there are 5 benefits of obviously walking slowly through the crowd. Number 1 is obtain key information. When you walk slowly through the crowd, they're going to tell you some stuff, right from the grassroots. Number 2, to keep people informed. You see, as the leader, you're not only obtaining key information, but you're keeping your people informed. Number 3, to obtain feedback, going back and forth. Number 4, to facilitate learning. And I think number 5 is the key on the management by walking around. Understand what people think and feel. Listen carefully. Many of the world's greatest leaders were known for their compassionate and caring nature. During the Civil War, for example, Abraham Lincoln was famous for pardoning young soldiers who were to be shot for desertion. He appealed to the, and I love this phrase, better angels of our nature, and was certain to have let the South move easily back into the Union had he not been assassinated. Lincoln's unusual empathy for people can be traced to his having grown up in abject poverty and never having forgotten the plight of the underprivileged. Lincoln grew up in poverty. Roosevelt experienced a disease. And while the qualities of compassion and empathy are not limited to the leaders who experience difficult circumstances earlier in life, it should be remembered that Martin Luther King Jr. has always been regarded as a compassionate man of the common people. As a matter of fact, when Time magazine named him 1963 Man of the Year, the cover story acknowledged that he had an indescribable capacity for empathy that is the touchstone of leadership. So how do we conclude this lesson on creating positive change among people? Martin Luther King Jr. defined courage as the power of the mind to overcome fear and the determination not to be overwhelmed by any object. At every moment, he was conscious of my limitations. He admitted he didn't have all the answers. I am still searching myself. He said, I don't know everything. This next phrase is an incredible phrase. He said he wouldn't have any money to leave behind, but just wanted to leave a committed life behind. Wow, that's powerful. He who is the greatest among you shall be the servant, he often quoted from the scriptures. I want to be a servant. And he didn't want a long funeral, not even a eulogy of more than 1 or 2 minutes, he said. On that day, he wanted no mention of his Nobel Peace Prize or the hundreds of other awards that he had received. Rather, he said, I'd like somebody to mention that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others, tried to love somebody, tried to feed the hungry, to clothe those who were naked, to visit those who were in prison, tried to love and serve humanity. Say that I was a drum major for justice, a drum major for peace, a drum major for righteousness. Through his words and actions, it's clear that Dr. King wanted people to remember of him that I did try, I did try, I did try.
Hey, welcome back, podcast family. Welcome back, Traci. I am excited about week number 2, creating positive change. Now, as we began to kind of unpack this, Traci, I'm reminded of a quote from Donald McGannon. He said that leadership is an action, not a position. And if we learned anything today from John Maxwell's observation of Dr. King, we learned that Dr. King was a man of action.
Yes, he was.
He's a man that truly, his actions continue to this day as we debrief him again. So welcome back. So glad to be breaking this down again with you today.
I am as well. And he was not just a man of action, but he was a man who moved others to action. Yeah. And here we are 60 years later, and we're still talking about how he's moving us to action, and we're celebrating how we can find new creative ways to act on the things that as we're learning and growing still today. I came up with a quote too. I've got one here by Martin Luther King Jr. And it goes like this: the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And that really encapsulates where he lived. He lived in that tension. And that inspires me. That inspires me because I think as humans, we just are continually striving. Well, I'll just say I am, but continually striving to get comfortable, right? I mean, we as leaders push ourselves out of the comfort nest, but yet intuitively we always are trying to make things so we feel a little bit more comfortable, so we are in a place where we're comfortable, so the temperature is comfortable, and we are eating something so we don't feel too hungry, and when we start to work out, we don't want to sweat too much or feel too much pain. We always want to stay in that comfortable space, and that's not where we actually find out who we are as people. And so on point number 3, John kicks off talking about how he moved other people to action. And if you guys look in your notes there, you'll see he breaks it down, that point number 3, into 4 points, which I think are shining examples. If we all did these in our family, in our work environment, in the movement that we're passionate about, it literally could change our world. So Mark, in point 3, how he was persuasive and moved other people to action. Which of those 4 pieces, which one speaks to you as a leader of a movement today and inspires you and calls to you?
So you've heard me on this podcast, whether you visually watch us at maxwellpodcast.com/YouTube, or whether you listen in through one of your favorite podcast players. You've heard me say values-based, people-centered servant leadership, to the point that many of you just probably roll your eyes. But it's really a rallying cry of our message. And so coming back to your question, Traci, of which one probably speaks to me at this time of leadership, 60 years after the model of leader Martin Luther King lived, it would probably be appealing to ethics and morality. I believe when you hear, and I mentioned this last week, but when you hear John Maxwell say things like he's leadership sad, I don't think that's a statement of hopelessness, that there's no hope, that things are not going to get better. I think that's a statement of reality, that we've really started becoming comfortable with only celebrating highlights and not admitting lowlights. Social media has helped us with that. It's a highlight reel, right? Yeah. And then I think the other thing that we've become extremely comfortable with in every society, in every community that I go to, is we've become comfortable with making certain people or certain classes of people better than others. It's true in Romania, where I just was just a few months ago. It's true in Costa Rica, where I was just a few weeks ago. It's true in the United States, where I live. We have this ability to somehow, in the name of ethics, in the name of morality, to position ourselves better than the other person. I was recently, back in November, I was at one of our events called Exchange. We'll talk more about that event at some point in a future podcast. But Donald Miller, one of my favorite writers, was at Exchange, and he talked about this story that all of us are living. And in this story is a victim, a villain, a hero, and a guide. And I won't teach Donald Miller stuff, although it's worth teaching. We'll try to get him on here sometime. But he talked about how that all of us have in each moment the temptation to be one of those, a victim, a villain, a hero, a guide, and how that this villain in us try to make other people look bad so that we don't feel as bad about being bad. We vilify people. And I'm going back to a very long answer, Traci, to say, I believe what Donald Miller is saying is the same thing that John Maxwell is saying, is the same thing that Martin Luther King was saying, is we have a dream that all men, women would be seen as equal, being able to have equal opportunity and equal chance to be respected and to be valued. And so that's why John Maxwell has built his entire platform on a values-based leadership, on a concept of serving others. Because when you serve others, you see them as valuable. And that's what we're trying to do. When you see people needing help, needing help, then you tend to want to lord over them because you have an answer, they don't. Let me help you. That way you'll owe me. But when we see people as valuable, we serve them. And that whole concept that we're giving our life to, Traci, and you're a big part of this, and Martin Luther King did this, it's this real passion to come to the ethics and the morality deep within human beings and say, we are people of value that value people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was taking notes as you were writing. If those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you're seeing me writing away. That's right in line with we did Live to Lead. We had Cheryl Batchelder, CEO of Popeyes, a few years ago, and she said, in faith-based communities, they tend to love their people, but they aren't great at finding solutions necessarily in the bottom line. And then in secular-based companies, sometimes the struggle is that they are bottom line oriented and solution oriented, but struggle to love their people. And so I was just thinking on point number 4, where John talked about that Martin Luther King Jr. was great at forming alliances with others and being solution oriented. He really mastered both edges of what Cheryl talked about. And that was loving people, but also having solutions. And so can you break that down a little bit for somebody who is kind of leans one way or the other as a leader?
Yeah, I can do my best. One of the things I love about Martin Luther King, I love this about him, is he was in the middle of a very tense time. Now, just remember, there were other people that were very influential in the civil rights movement that resorted to anger and frustration, rightly so. Imagine what people were going through at that time. There should have been anger.
Right.
There was a righteous indignation. There was rightness in being indignant and frustrated. But Martin Luther King said, he saw bigger than that. And he said, righteous indignation is going to further create a chasm, but love has ability to bridge over the chasm, and I'm going to choose love. And so we come back to this question: how did he bring people together in a time that there was rightful anger and frustration and pent up emotion? He did it with love.
Yeah.
He did it with an emotion that most people don't employ when something is wrong or when they have been wronged. Yet that was what he chose. I very similarly, I see that within each of us right now, we have this ability to really get challenged, because this is going to be a little dated perhaps for some of you, but others around the world. I just got back from Italy. I just got back from Amsterdam. I just got back from the Dominican Republic. And many of our friends around the world is still fighting against COVID significantly, to wear a mask or not wear a mask. And we try to polarize subjects all the time rather than love people exactly where they are. We either try to change them or condemn them. That's our two options. Well, I'm going to tell you, Martin Luther King showed us another option. Do they deserve condemnation? Perhaps. Do they need to be changed? Perhaps. But let's not even deal with that. Righteous position. Is there a way to love people right where they are? And I think when you look at our subject matter today, Traci, we were about creating positive change. And yet Martin Luther King chose to love where people were, and he created these alliances, and he consolidated positions and posturing with the bridge of love. And I want to see those models come back for us with all the tense things we're dealing with right now, to where we as leaders find a higher narrative, a louder noise than all the divisive positions that we're taking on points and issues these days. And let's find something bigger that we can rally around as one people, one team, as Martin Luther King says, one dream, And I believe that leadership is going to make a difference in today's economy.
That's right. And I believe that today that it's not like, well, we tried love then, it didn't work. And so now we need to try hate. No, love, we continue to bang the drum of love. I think of that quote by Martin Luther King where he says, I have decided, hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to stick with love. And so today we can continue to honor what he began, continuing to love when it is easier to hate. That when we talked about going what's more comfortable is to lean into getting angry and hating, and instead that righteous anger isn't wrong. It's what we do with our anger, and instead with love, being moved to act just as he was. And so point number 5 was walking slowly through the crowd, touching people. John is great at loving people too. He really embodies what Martin Luther King Jr. did, taught, modeled. He broke it down into five parts there of the management of walking around. In this world, you kind of hit on social media, but in this world of social media, Mark, how do we, what does it look like to walk slowly through a crowd when largely the crowd is on social media and distanced from us?
Something that I started in late 2021 and I'm continuing in 2022 is I had Kimberly, my executive partner, I had her get some note cards for me. Remember those? Not direct message, not Instagram messaging. I'm talking about note cards, like paper that goes in envelopes. Y'all remember those, right? For those of you that are listening to the podcast, I'm illustrating it on YouTube, and it's this note. And here's what I found as I try to write 5 notes of appreciation a week. Now, some of you that do it 5 a day, don't condemn me. I'm just getting started. But 5 a week. And here's what I found. Comments like, thank you for slowing down and sending me a note. Thank you for taking time to send me a note. Wow. Thank you for the thoughtfulness behind that note. It's a note, people. It's a note. Powerful. But here's why. It's slowing down and walking slowly through the crowd of instant messaging on Instagram. It's a slowing down mindset. So my challenge to you and I, as we try to create this positive change that Dr. King Jr. and John Maxwell pulling out of the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think if he was to walk slowly through the crowd of social media, through the noise of social media, I think you would find a few dialed phone calls on his phone. I think, in other words, not text, but just pick up the phone and say, hey, I just wanted to hear your voice. And now here's what I was going to tell you on text message. I called my 15-year-old daughter last week from I can't remember, Italy or wherever I was. And I called her and I said, hey, Macy. She said, Dad, what did you want? What's wrong? You're calling me. I said, what do you mean? She said, it must be an emergency. You're calling me. And I said, why? And she said, well, 1, it's late, but 2, you're calling me rather than texting me. And I went, oh, no. I'm allowing my 15-year-old daughter to realize that the best way to communicate, or the only way to communicate, is through text message. And I'm not dying on text message or killing or slamming text message. I use it a lot, but slowing down and walking through the crowd means doing something different to be unforgettable in communicating someone else's value.
That's really good. In closing, he said, John quoted him as saying, I want to leave a committed life behind. And I know you want to leave a committed life behind. Yeah. We hear that from you week in and week out. I see you that up close and personal with you, Mark. I know you love your people, your family, the people you serve and do life with. And for me, I think of what Andy Stanley says, do for the few what you wish you could do for the many. That's kind of what you just described there. We can't write a million note cards out to everybody because life is different than it used to be. But we can do for the few what we wish we could do for the many. And I think, as we listen to this, I think how can I personally, I'm listening, and I know you are all listening and thinking the same thing. How can I honor Martin Luther King Jr. and what he was passionate about, and how he honored people and loved all people, and how can I pass that on to my kids, not just in what I say, but how I live, and that really is. That's the kind of committed life I want to leave behind. That's what my kids will say. Maybe a million people won't say it. Generations of people won't say it about me. I don't know. But at least the people who are closest to me will have seen the way that I lived life and treated people, and what a powerful thing that we can do. As you kind of close out this lesson, Mark, what is it that's on you at the forefront? I mean, there's so many lessons that we have. What is it that you're thinking is that you want to kind of carry his legacy on and merge it with yours?
As you were sharing there and talking about, what do I want Macy, my daughter, Tori, my daughter, my grandkids, what do I want them to carry on from me? Or what do I want my legacy to be like or about? I go back to, Traci, here's where I went, and this may be going a little bit of a different direction, but you asked me, where'd my mind go? And so you can't convince me that Martin Luther King standing at Washington Mall with the speech that we all have died to listen to and want to listen to all the time, but specifically this time of the year, you can't convince me while he was up there saying, I have a dream, that he was going, and I hope two people that can't even relate to me 60 years from now is celebrating my birthday. I don't think he ever thought that. I don't think, and again, remember this lesson that we heard today from John Maxwell was in the presence of Coretta Scott King and Bernice King. I don't think he ever said, I hope this guy named John Maxwell, who's written a lot of books, stands in front of my family and pulls out leadership lessons from my life. I don't think he had that thought at all. Yeah. And so many times we spend more time on thinking about what we want our legacy to be rather than just being the legacy we want it to be.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's why I love this quote. I want to leave a committed life, period. That's what I want. I want to leave a committed life. Yes. I don't want to try to engineer what my family or people close to me is going to say down the road. I just want to leave a committed life. I want to believe in something so strongly, Traci, that my passion and my model is what people dissect in their own way 60 years down the road.
That's good, Mark.
I'm not looking for my birthday, July the 11th, to be some fixed date in some country to remember my contribution. I want a committed life to replicate so that what I did and what I stood for carries beyond any of the things so many times we think of when we think about legacy.
Yeah.
One of the things that John did a couple of years ago is he rewrote the book, Developing the Leader Within, or Developing the Leader Around You. And we called it The Leader's Greatest Return. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding this book up. And what John's really saying in this book is, how do you reproduce what you're about? Not how do you reproduce yourself? Wouldn't the world be boring if we had all Mark Cole? Yes, the answer is yes. But what about the things that I stand for, the influence that I have? How do we replicate that? And so even today, I just wanted to bring this book into the studio because it was fresh on my mind as I was thinking about the impact 60 years later that Martin Luther King is having. He got a great return on his life. Did he leave us too soon? Yes. Do we still need to put in practice things he dreamt about 60 years ago? Please, yes. But did he get a return on a life well lived? As he said, a committed life? Oh, you betcha. You betcha he did. And that's what each one of us want. That's what I want for you today in honor of Martin Luther King. Stand for something so strong, as I said last week, that when you are done, people will want to carry it forward. That's the goal. That's what we want. For those of you that want the book, Jake, let's try to get a percentage, some kind of a promo code for this. And maybe we'll give 15% off of you that want to buy that book. If you'll go and enter the code podcast in the show notes, we'll put a link there. And Jake, make sure we get some kind of percentage off on that, and you'll be able to get it. That's what we want.
That's our birthday present to Dr.
That's
Martin
exactly
Luther
right.
King Jr.
That's exactly right. We want a return on the life we live. Today, as we close out week 2, this could go on for 52 weeks, to be honest with you, talking about the impact of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But as we close out our second week of understanding how he created positive change, my challenge to you is stand for something so strong. Be positive. Be full of positive change to impact the world, the community around you. That will lend itself to a great return. Thank you for joining us today. Traci, as always, thank you for making this podcast so much brighter, so much better. And for Jake, you and Jared and others that have been in here to make this day possible, we thank you. We love serving alongside of you. Podcast family, we'll see you back next week. Until then, let's listen, let's learn, let's lead, let's do it all in love.